All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. And I'm happy to welcome today Mike Madrid. He's a Republican consultant. He is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project and the author of the book, The Latino Century. Mike Madrid, great to have you here.
Matt, it's great to be with you. I was surprised that we hadn't met in person yet, but I feel like we're longtime friends, electronically anyway, as the kids say.
Isn't it crazy? But we'll meet IRL one of these days, as the kids say.
We will.
In the meantime, we'll just have to keep our conversations to Signal, which I know is encrypted. I know it's super safe. What do you make? I mean, on one hand, I feel like this is a huge story. Obviously, I'm talking about the Jeffrey Goldberg from the Atlantic being included on apparently highly sensitive Signal text chain with national security, Secretary of Defense, that sort of thing. Is this a big deal, or is this like one out of 100 stories about Trump? And next week we'll be on to something else.
It's such a good question, Matt, because the way I think maybe I view what a big deal story is a little bit different than most, because there are so many big deal stories that are rolling out every day. What I do think makes this different and what makes this a big deal is that when a story breaks through sort of the traditional outrage bubble of people who are constantly watching the media every day to see what the latest outrage and concern is, justifiably so. But when it breaks through into kind of popular culture, and I think the real test will be Saturday Night Live. Right? If Saturday Night Live is doing skits on it, it's broken through. And most importantly, whether or not this is going to have a damaging effect to a president whose polling numbers are clearly ending his honeymoon phase. Consumer confidence is reaching a new low. There's a new separation between Donald Trump's job performance and his personal likability, which I think is the real metric to watch. And then you're starting to see things on the ground, right? This anger that you're seeing at Republican town halls, the Democrats winning special elections in Trump plus 15 districts last night in Pennsylvania. Like, all of these things are signs that there's a lot of movement on the ground where people are seeing it. They are hearing it. It's not this one issue specifically, but I think the fact that this Signal group happened, that Hegseth is out there going to have to defend it. He was one of the first, besides Matt Gaetz, one of the first really controversial appointments. And there was a lot of concern about his competence, his basic understanding of the job. And this plays into all of that incompetence. And yes, I think it is breaking through.
I know you agree with me that when it comes to scoring political points and winning elections, Democrats are better off talking about inflation and pocketbook issues than they are talking about esoteric ideas like liberal democracy. Right. Do you worry that this issue, which is very important, having to do with national security? I mean, one of the many, many problems with this is that rather than using a skiff or some sort of it's entirely possible that like China is reading what one of these guys are
probable
texting on Signal, right? But yes, doesn't that fit into the category of things Americans ought to be concerned about, but probably aren't?
It certainly does. And again, that's why I think this is so important, is because we're talking about literally war plans and acts of war, people dying, use of military power. You're seeing in this saga disagreement between the vice president and the president of the United States. You're seeing a cabinet discussion on what amounts to essentially a chat group from high school friends, talking about when they're going to, do whatever they're going to do. Like, the fact that they're talking about this stuff on Signal is horrifying in and of itself. And I think people get that because it plays into the basic arguments that Democrats have been rightfully laying the groundwork on, which is this is not a cabinet of competence. These are low-level junior varsity actors who don't understand the seriousness and consequential nature of the roles that they're in, and they're demonstrating it. And keep in mind, they've only been on the job 60 days.
Yeah.
This will get worse. This is not the last time that something like this happens. This is not a slip. This is who these people are. And so it's going to keep unraveling and keep unrolling. And I think what's going to be fascinating to me is to watch. The administration has already doubled down and is now blaming the reporter somehow, which will go quite a ways in the MAGA bubble. That's all you need to do. But if the story continues, does Trump get rid of Waltz or Hegseth? And if he does that, does that pivot away from this impenetrability that they've kind of this aura that they've set up? In
Yeah.
fact, that may be one of the reasons why no matter how bad it gets, they just keep going forward.
Walls could be the scapegoat here because it seems like amongst some of the MAGA, right, the big sin isn't using Signal, which could, possibly be hacked. Um, it's, it's not violating the Records Act or whatever. The big
Right.
sin is that somebody probably had Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic in their contact list, which means they may be talking to the
Right.
mainstream media, possibly leaking information.
Leaking.
And that
That's
is
right.
the unpardonable sin. So maybe somebody will be sacrificed for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. The only reason to have the editor of the Atlantic on your contacts list is to leak information. You're not working proactively the with the Atlantic to sit down and have coffee and articulate what the geopolitical strategy is of the Trump administration if you're on the National Security Council. That's the only reason to have it. Okay. So that's one. But two, the only inviolable act you can commit in MAGA world is disloyalty, is undermining the president. And ironically, this won't happen, but this just puts the story in greater context. The person who was undermining the president of the United States policy here was J.D. Vance. The vice president was the one who was saying, I don't think this is a good idea. Like, let the Europeans, by the way, think about the Europeans. They're hearing all the top level cabinet people saying they're pathetic, they're weak, let them fend for themselves. Like, this is no longer just kind of like we're breaking up and let's stay friends. This is actively like dismissing them.
I'm breaking your records and I'm sleeping with your friends. This is like Taylor Swift album, revenge type stuff.
Yeah, and it's all behind closed doors. It's the secret stuff that we all know that they're saying, but here it is and all of its ugliness. And who else is going to want to share information with us? Like, what European, intelligence sources are going to give us information when J.D. Vance or Pete Hegseth maybe just sending it on Signal chat rooms to his friends and sending out emojis? And it's junior varsity. Like I said, this is not the best and the brightest, and it's dangerous when we're talking about acts of war.
So, look, I mean, when you have people who are doing incompetent, inept things, there very likely will be fallout, right? So, like, thank God that what they were doing, this irresponsible act of using Signal, didn't result in dead servicemen, Americans.
Right.
But it might have, right? And then some of the stuff that RFK Jr. is doing or that Doge is doing could result in, we may never know what cancer drug wasn't developed because NIH cut funding, or they cut NIH funding for research, right? But we do know that there's measles recently in Washington, D.C., but certainly in Texas.
Yeah.
So I think one scenario is that there's some huge disaster, God forbid, a COVID level thing that ultimately hurts Donald Trump and maybe takes him down. The other option is just like sort of grinding attrition where, like, day in and day out, there's a momentum building for Democrats and just a drumbeat of, prices aren't coming down. The Russia-Ukraine war still going on. Like, which of these two options do you think is more likely?
My biggest fear, look, if history is a guide, and it usually is, or it's pretty close, the Democrats are going to do, and most of the foundational elements of a strong political environment are the wind is starting to swell behind the backs and the sails of the Democrats. I think this is going to be a good midterm. It's way early. I know all of that. That's true. But the fundamentals really look for a very good Democratic year. My worry is the Democrats will win without learning the lessons of why they lost. And the reason why that's concerning is it means it could be a Pyrrhic victory and that it could swing right back at the reelection of the next president. So those are things that I'm looking for. The Democratic base right now is not just dispirited; it's half of it's dispirited, half of it's just enraged and angry. Just wrote a piece called the Democrats and their Tea Party moment. This reminds me, again, as a Republican,
Yeah.
I saw the Tea Party movement building up in 2009 during the Affordable Care Act debate. Thousands of people coming to these events, enraged. There's no policy difference between Tea Party folks and the average Republican at this time. Just white hot, pure anger at their own party. And that set the fertile ground for the rise of Trumpism.
Yep.
And that's my concern, is right now there is not a leader. There's not an ideological direction. There's a complete split between, are we going with AOC, are we going with Bernie, or do we need to moderate our message? There's the Gavin Newsom attempts on his podcast to moderate. There's the Ezra Klein book coming out. These are all normal and healthy, as long as there isn't this rage component which predominates. And that's what's bubbling up, and that's what has me concerned.
Right.
Again, we could talk about the fundamentals of the race heading into the midterms. We will probably a lot over the next couple of months. But the main thing is, if it's just anti-Trumpism, there's a danger that the party's victories could be Pyrrhic.
All right, a lot to unpack there. Let's get into it. So first of all, I was, up until the Tea Party, I was a dyed-in-the-wool, not just conservative, but like partisan Republican.
Yeah.
I was even a big fan of Sarah Palin back in 2008 when she was
Right.
very different than she turned out to be. Although certain people, I think, maybe saw the writing on the wall before I did. But it was around 2009, 2010 when you started to see like, I can't remember her name. I'm not a witch from Delaware.
Oh, yeah, the witch candidate from Delaware.
What was her
I don't
name?
even remember. It's a good thing
Yeah.
you don't remember.
It doesn't matter. But then Sharon Angle in Nevada,
Yeah.
similar vibe.
Yeah.
And Ken Buck, who later turned out to be very, more centrist, was kind of a rabble rouser at that point. And I started critiquing things I saw on the right that I didn't like the politics
Right.
of victimhood, identity politics. Like Sharon Angle told Harry Reid to man up, stuff like that I thought I just didn't like the victimhood. And I wrote a book called Too Dumb to Fail in 2016, where I actually talked about the Tea Party being the beginning of what led to Trump, which was fairly novel at the time, because I think a lot of people were saying the Tea Party was good, but Trump is bad. And I've said, well, I kind of think the Tea Party laid the predicate for this. So you and I think, agree on this. Having said that, couldn't Republicans actually argue that it worked out for them in a way?
Yeah. Well, yes. If working out is just pure raw power at the expense of your beliefs and ideas and principles, yes. I mean, if the goal is just who's got a bigger club and whose gang can beat up the other gang, yes. But that's my fear when I'm saying I'm seeing the same dynamics in the Democratic Party with the Tea Party movement, because say what you will about the Democratic Party, agree with it or disagree with it, they have assumed the mantle of responsible governance and this burden of defending institutions broadly, even though a lot of this stuff is really not defensible. They're like saying, okay, we'll defend all this bad stuff in government, even some of the waste, fraud, and abuse, because what's the alternative? The alternative is take a blowtorch to it and 100% of it goes away. Like, there's some virtue in that. The danger is if they start to take on the same characteristics as the MAGA hordes and just capitulates to the anger at their own leadership. They're so pissed at Chuck Schumer that because he didn't shut down the government. like listen to yourselves. Right? If that becomes the animating characteristic, as it did with the Republicans, then it is truly, we're no longer having a philosophical discussion about who we are as a people, where we should be going, and what direction we should be heading in. We're in a form of warfare. It's just mob versus mob, anger versus anger. Can we tear down your institutions before you tear down ours? And government will ultimately, cease to exist the way that we know it. That's my greatest fear.
It is a fear, and I think you and I see things very similar. I do want to push back, and for no other reason, just to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So let me play devil's advocate. The Democrats just ran a normie politician, Kamala Harris. Now, I know she said some crazy stuff in 2019, but in 2024, she talked about how she owned a gun. Democrats ran a serious, somewhat competent politician who tried to tack to the center. And and it wasn't good. And the American public, instead of voting for her, elected a guy who was impeached twice, convicted of God knows how many, felonies, found liable of sexual something, assault, whatever. We could go on. Incited the riot at the Capitol. But the American public chose him over the Democrats putting forward the most bland, normie politician. So, like, would you fault the Democrats for saying, well, maybe we should fight fire with fire? Like, maybe the public needs, or maybe our base need an enemy. What works is us versus them. We have to fight fire with fire.
Well, look, you're talking to one of the co-founders of the Lincoln Project. So yeah, I'm all about a good gutter fight. I don't mind that. That's not exactly what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when you turn on your own leaders and starts to blame them. Look, this is so much of this is understandable and predictable as a party out of power. There are very few levers of power that they control anymore. It's not unlike the Tea Party movement in 2009 when you and I started to see this weird thing start to developing, right? Republicans are literally out of control at every level of government. They're seeing this rock star politician who's doing something generationally and culturally that they've never seen before in Barack Obama. He's advancing healthcare to nationalize healthcare, which is like the nightmare scenario for conservatives. And they're losing, and people become despondent. It's a threat to your identity. So there's no question that the Democrats need to do a hell of a lot better fighting. I will be the tip of the spear to say that. I agree with that. But what I'm also saying is when your rage becomes the goal in and of itself, such that you turn the cannon inside the ship and you start shooting your own people, I think that's a bigger sign to say, hold on a second. What are we trying to do here? Because if we continue to do that, we're really not a party anymore. And what do you win, even if you do win the gutter fight? And that's my fear of where the country is heading, is if this is just about power, and it's not about a philosophy of government, it's not about protecting institutions, then you will see Democrats do things like the Republicans are doing, which is defending the indefensible, using the awesome power of the federal government to punish its enemies.
Yeah.
Where is the line? Like where is the line? And once the line is gone, then we're no longer having a civilized discussion about politics. We're talking about, very serious, significant domestic conflict.
No, I completely agree. I think that it's entirely possible that we go there where neither party are the serious, adult, responsible party that cares about institutions and the rule of law. And but if Democrats choose to go that way, I kind of get it. I get it.
Totally understandable.
Yeah.
But I think that people, especially like you and I, who were there when we saw it happening, have a particular responsibility to say, I get it, but this is happening. Let's not pretend like this is not what this means, because the consequences of going down this road aren't good. And I'm not saying that there's even a better alternative, but let's understand where we're heading, because this forever changes our character as a nation. I do believe that.
Well, this happened in the 1930s in Europe, and it's happening now, actually. And
it is
in a lot of the world where sort of centrist, liberal, pro-democracy parties are seen as effete and old-fashioned and boring, and the excitement, the energy is on the right and the left, right? So you've got like the communists and the fascists, basically, as opposed to center-right, center-left. And you want to be, if you're young especially, you want to be revolutionary, you want to be exciting, and these are old ideas, but they're now seen as new by a generation that's not old enough to have institutional memory. That's a real fear, and it does feel like there's some of that in the wind.
History is rhyming, friend. It absolutely is. And it absolutely is. And that's kind of the challenge of older generations, is to kind of pass these lessons on and to fight. I think that's a big reason why you've seen in this period of incredible change in the coalitions of the parties, older voters now are becoming much more democratic. because they're protecting the institutions. It's no longer a philosophical or ideological battle. It's like we know what this means. We've seen this in our history, our lifetimes before. This doesn't end well. And it's why I think a lot of younger people are breaking more Republican, because they are trying to say, we want to do something different. We kind of like where this is going. We know the system isn't working for us. I mean, we could spend a whole show talking about how the system, American system, has basically failed a younger generation. I get it. It's all of the seeds are there. All of the seeds are there, and they have been throughout history, as you've mentioned, in these dark periods that are apparently ascendant again. But again, for those of us that have been watching and reading and studying and learning, we have this, I think, specific responsibility and obligation to say, I get it, but let's not fool ourselves on where this is heading. This is not a good thing.
I mean, I think if you're in sort of a normie conservative, like, I think like you and me,
Yeah.
There's a lot to be concerned about. Like, on one hand, you could say, like, well, this woke stuff's problematic. I don't want to be canceled. I don't want my kids to go to school and have trans, story hour. I don't like the DEI stuff.
Right.
And frankly, all those things do concern me, but I don't think they're nearly as problematic or dangerous right now as what Trump is doing. But I think if you watch Fox News all day long, or ironically, if like, I have a friend who's a college professor at a very liberal school, and like, in his day in and day out life, the left is much more menacing to him than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So I think it does depend on the perspective, but I'm not sure where I'm going with this.
I like where you're going. I don't either, but I'm in the ride with you. Here's why. A lot of friends I have that are kind of intellectuals who have kind of made their career life on the left, academics and such, have always been voicing this. Mike, you don't understand how dangerous what is happening on the left is. This is a form of totalitarianism. Cancel culture is a form of authoritarianism. If you can't think and you can't speak and you lose your free speech rights and you have to conform, that is a form of authoritarianism. It just absolutely is. And that is what I think a lot of people on the center left don't understand, is that we are in this time of emergent authoritarianism. It doesn't just mean right-wing authoritarianism. It means bottom-up populist authoritarianism, where the established social institutions that we have known for hundreds, if not thousands of years, are no longer working. And people are looking for structure. They're looking for answers. They're looking for an ideology. And if it's wokeism on the left, or if it's sort of this, neo-fascism on the right, they're all about it. And if you're not with the program, you're the enemy. And I'd like to believe that we were back in 20 years ago when I was younger in politics, that there was a center, right? There's the centrist isn't listened to. I don't believe there's a center in American politics at all. I don't think there has been for a long time, because I don't think the right-left spectrum exists anymore. There's just too much commonality to understand that what we're really in the midst of is not a debate about whether government should be bigger or smaller, the way conversations you and I would have had 20 years ago. We're having conversations about whether the institutions themselves should exist. Should we have the Department of Education? Should we be gutting government first, the way Elon Musk wants to, and then rebuilding it in their own image? That's not Reagan conservatism. No. That's not Buckley conservatism.
I mean, in a way, it's actually Burkean conservatism versus radicalism, because those of us who are conservatives want to reform systems, but we don't want to burn things down. Correct. And begin the world over.
Right. Yeah.
So but you're right, though. It's certainly not the right versus left spectrum that you and I, or that honestly certainly for the 20th years. Century, we got used to.
Yeah. No, and I think the faster we come to acknowledge that this populist moment, there's no such thing as progressive populism and conservative populism. Like, you keep hearing these terms, and it's like those are inconsistent. Those are properly understood. Populism is essentially a countercultural movement that is designed to bring institutions down. That's what populism is. What we do is we're still trying to hold on to these relics of the past by saying, oh, that's just Donald Trump is conservative populism and Bernie Sanders is progressive populism. No, it's not. They're both talking about radically restructuring society. Both of them are. And the sooner we come to understand that, I think the sooner we can start to come to solutions. But so many people of a certain age, my age especially, aren't capable of understanding a world where the right-left spectrum doesn't exist. So we're trying to force this new world into our understanding. And I think it's why so many of us are flummoxed by what's happening is the square peg doesn't fit into the round hole and we can't understand why.
No, it's hard. Luckily, I have a 14-year-old who keeps me
translates the world for you.
He tries. Well, speaking of which, let me ask you about this. So I think certainly for me, the rise of the Tea Party was the first time I started seeing problems with the right. Christine O'Donnell was her name, by the way.
There you go. Nice. Well done. Well played.
That's the first time. And again, it was the politics of victimhood. It was identity politics. It was that kind of thing. But look, I love Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan said a lot of great things that were very eloquent and charismatic and that I firmly agree with. But he also had a touch, certainly, of populist appeal. And Newt Gingrich, whom I, liked a lot, was much more, it was sort of radical and revolutionary. But I always felt like it was like a spice. It wasn't the meal. It was like something that made it interesting and like, yeah, we can gen up some excitement this way. But at the end of the day, we're going to be mainstream conservatives. Was I wrong? When did you were you with me that it didn't bother you? That sort of demagoguery, small doses of it seem fine.
Well, I mean, there's always been a smattering of populism in Republican politics, at least since the end of the Second World War, because at its foundation, conservatism believed, and I said believed in the past tense, I no longer believe this is true, conservatism believed that the biggest threat to personal liberties and freedoms was government. And if that's the premise, then you can understand the rise of Goldwater and Buckley and some of the bigger thinkers, the Reaganism, right?
I would actually say, and this is an important caveat, I think you're right, except I think we actually believe that the biggest threat was the Soviet Union. And that is why we were sane and during this Cold War era.
Yeah.
Government was secondary of our threats. The primary threat was winning the Cold War.
That's
fair. I think that had a very positive impact on conservatism.
I agree. That's fair. That's a great qualification. And I would agree with that. Now let's go to 1989. The wall falls. Cold War's over. End of history. America wins. It's the next step up the evolutionary ladder of humankind. Free markets, freedom, blah, blah, blah. American exceptionalism. The problem is government at this time, as we move from the industrial age into the digital age, government is no longer the biggest threat to our personal liberties or our personal freedoms. I would argue it's not even a foreign threat like China or Russia. It is technology. Technology starts to become, it knows us better than we know ourselves, right? The algorithms have taken over. The rise of artificial intelligence is now a far greater threat to human liberty and freedom as we've known it than government ever was. And so conservatism naturally collapses, right? Reaganism naturally goes away. What Reagan was talking about becomes less and less of a threat to everyday understanding of what freedom is. The difference was Reagan had people like Jack Kemp who were trying to say there's a conservative way to govern. Government can be evil when it is just left to its own devices, like any power. Like gravity, right? Can be your best friend or your worst enemy if you know how to use the power. That's what Kemp comes in and says is we can lift people out. I am my brother's keeper. We can lift people out. If we use conservative governance, we can build a better society for everybody, and that's our obligation. That line of thinking is completely gone from the Republican Party now. And here's what's fascinating, Matt. Where it's popping up is in works like Ezra Klein's book, Abundance. The YIMBY movement, yes, in my backyard, right? You have all these progressives and urban core saying we need to develop more. It's like these people sound like Republican real estate developers in the 80s, but they call themselves YIMBYs and it's cool now. It's like, that's Reaganism. That's Jack Kemp conservatism. These opportunity zones, were the empowerment zones. The Obama's opportunity zones were literally the exact same thing that Jack Kemp was talking about when he was talking about empowerment zones. So history is rhyming. As the coalitions change, you are starting to see the pro-growth wing of the Democratic Party look a lot like 1980s conservatism that you and I knew, while the Republican Party is descending into this populist, anti-countercultural,
Yeah.
anti-establishment, countercultural movement.
2 points there. One, isn't it interesting that that Reagan's movement was so big and diverse that it had Pat Buchanan and Jack Kemp, and they were friends,
Yeah,
actually. In fact,
yeah,
Buchanan one year didn't run for president out of deference to Jack. I'm sorry. Yeah, Buchanan didn't run for president. I forget which year, out of deference for Jack Kemp. They were afraid it would like split the conservative vote
yeah.
and elect a moderate. So it's interesting. But I want to linger more on the larger point you made, which I think is underrated. I mean, everybody sort of knows that social media and the internet has changed everything, but I don't think we really appreciate how much
Yeah.
this technological shift has changed everything. It is crazy. And again, I think it's underrated, but talk if you would about that.
Well, and I think this explains in large part the generational shift that we're witnessing. Is if you're, I'm in my 50s now. I'm 53. I remember life before the internet, right? Like I got my first email address in college. So like the development of this new technology, when Al Gore was talking about inventing the internet and where this was all heading, was all prospective. Now, when we're in the 2020s and heading barrel, we're eyeballs deep in this. It's not coming; it's here. It's this is the norm. But my frame of understanding the world is through the industrial age, and the industrial age, like all ages before it, were defined by the hierarchy of systems. And the last one, the most bureaucratic, the most slow, cumbersome, deliberative, was government for a reason. We wanted it slow and cumbersome and deliberate to create stability, which is what government should do. When information flows are now moving, the world is flat, like Krugman said 20 years ago correctly. The economy was the first to adapt, but we started to lose institutions like the media, the traditional newspaper. We lost trust and confidence in the church, in government, in academia, in the military, in everything. The confidence and trust in institutions is collapsing, and it's been collapsing since the advent of mass communications. Even when TV, right? Everyone's seeing Vietnam. Everyone says, oh, it was Watergate that did it. How about 10 years of watching daily conflict in Vietnam when everybody's watching the stories and realizing their government was lying to them under the Johnson administration? Like all of this compounds. This isn't a partisan argument. It's an argument to say as communications become more broad-based, we lose confidence in the trust in hierarchical institutions. Well, we're now at a point where the media and our information flows are so atomized that it's the American right that has dominated the space such that the left still believes that it's this right-wing media bubbles. The bubble is now on the left. Right-wing media is mainstream. It has much more viewers, much more listeners, much more adherents than the New York Times and MSNBC do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're completely unaware of all of these movements that are rising and saying this is what's happening culturally. And this divide between young and old people is not just a traditional generational gap, it's a technological gap.
Totally.
It's a gap between an understanding of the world that doesn't see institutions the same way. And so it's why I think so many older people are rallying now to the Democratic Party and saying, wait a second, we're going to lose all of these things that have served humankind for thousands of years. And younger people are going, hasn't really served us, doesn't really work that way. Let's just create an app and find a better solution than trying to work with government to get these things done. And there's some truth to that. Like I said, there's some truth to all of this.
Super scary. Look, I think Democrats were harmed. It was a resource curse. I mean, they had the mainstream media. We all know that most people in the mainstream media were liberally biased. So they didn't have to, they had the New York Times, they had PBS, they had NPR. So they didn't have to create these alternative outlets like Fox News or talk radio. And so, or blogs even, Twitter. And so I think that the right, out of necessity,
Correct,
outflanked the left when it came to new media, which just so happens to have then become much hipper and cooler because in the traditional, I don't know, mainstream media, establishment media, there were rules and you wore a necktie and you talked very serious. But The alternate media was much more authentic, much more casual, and I think it just naturally appealed to kind of working class folks. Once they all got on social media, there was a delay to that. I remember when the only people on Twitter were kind of cool young liberal people.
Right,
But now
right.
your grandparents are on Twitter.
Yeah.
So it's just this very weird, crazy time, and like everything has changed, and I don't think there's any going back.
No.
And the Democrats, again, now I think just are playing catch up. I mean, Donald Trump intuitively, I don't think he's that technologically sophisticated really, but he has a sense for what works in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, and let's remember something. In the 1960s, the left was countercultural.
Yep.
They were attacking the media. Don't trust anybody over 30, right? That was
Yep.
that was the saying of the baby boomer generation. They were attacking the academia. They were challenging Berkeley free speech.
Yeah. That's
They
one of the
they
other
were
reasons, by the way, that I couldn't stand the Tea Party, because they reminded me of like the 1960s hippies talking about, the man, the establishment,
right.
it was like, I became a Republican because I didn't like you people. Why do I want to now emulate you?
And you're hitting on something that I think really captures the moment. Is in each of those instances, what those people were really saying was, we don't trust this institution because of who has captured it. And that's precisely where the right and the left, we partisanize our institutions. If you're a Democrat, you believe and you trust in the university higher education academy. You trust the legacy media, the New York Times, MSNBC. You believe in government. If you're on the right, you believe in trust in the military. You believe and trust in the church. You believe and trust in businesses broadly more than on the left. And the other side's institutions are an existential threats to your identity, where we say they're evil. The media is the enemy of the people, you will hear from the right. The academy is indoctrinating people. They're not educating people anymore, you will hear on the right. And on the left, it's like the same sort of vitriol that is about the institutions owned and captured by the right. So what you're saying is very spot on, and it's very important to understand this moment. When both sides become countercultural movements, when the Democrats also descend into rage and populism, all we're doing at this point is now destroying each other's institutions. And the thing about social institutions is they are run by men and women. They are inherently fallible. They've never been perfect, but civilizations cannot function without them. Even if they are imperfect, we have to have some common trust in something. Otherwise, you stop believing in a common set of facts. You stop believing in a common set of information flows, and we simply devolve into this tribalism. And that's where I think this moment is emerging.
Yes. But don't you think that Bernie and AOC in this day and age would have a better shot than Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And is that bad? Do you think that would Bernie AOC be?
You mean politically viability?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
You and I agree on that.
Yeah.
But then the question I have is, would Bernie AOC be going the direction that you're warning against?
Yeah, I mean, with a little bit of a difference, because they actually do believe in the institution of government to reorient society and to change it in their direction, where Republicans don't. But here's the danger. The danger, and look, this is on the right and on the left. When Donald Trump says this is just a swamp, that's dangerous language. That's not true. I understand what he's saying, but it's also dangerous for when Elizabeth Warren says it's impossible to get ahead in America. Like, that's dangerous language, and it's also quantifiably false.
Yep.
When Bernie Sanders says the system is rigged, there's a danger in that. There's a corrosive danger that drives mistrust in institutions. Yeah. And when you don't have trust in institutions, you're building a movement bent on destruction, not on building.
AOC said when Joe Biden was president that he should just ignore some court decisions.
There you go. Yeah, it just becomes about raw power for both sides. And I understand now the argument that, well, if one side is going to do that, we've got to compete with the alternative. I think you're saying that. I'm saying that. I agree with that. But what I'm also not going to let up is saying I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying that's an incredibly dangerous thing. While I understand it, let's also be clear-eyed and sober about what that means in the next 5 years, 3, 5, 7 years. Like this, the moment is upon us where we are saying the role of government no longer matters. It's pure raw power between tribes. That does not end well. It could end horrifically if we're not careful. And the more that mentality consumes both parties, the greater the likelihood that it ends really, really bad, as opposed to finding some moderate landing place.
All right, I could totally nerd out, and we could just talk about these deep questions. No, trust me, I love it. But let's go back to Trump, and then I want to end by talking about the Latino vote, which is super important, obviously. But let me just ask you this question about Trump, and I've been asking kind of everybody this same question. Tom Nichols, David Frum, Mike Murphy. It's an esteemed group of people that have been asked this question, which is like, what do you think Donald Trump's end game is? Because I feel like a lot of the things he's doing right now are poised to not work, right? Tariffs are very likely going to cause prices to go up and possibly hurt Trump supporters. What Elon's doing, let's say, for example, with Social Security, old people aren't going to be able to call the 1-800 number and verify their identity if they have problems with Social Security. They're going to have to trek down to some government agency or figure out a way to get online. Good luck with that if you're 90 years old or something.
Right.
So it seems fraught with danger. It seems politically stupid to me. So I guess the question is, is Trump just trying to get all the unpopular stuff out of the way now so he can start sending us checks before, the midterms or before the next election? Or is he just somehow like rigging the game so he's just going to stay in office? He's never going to have to run for office again? Or is he really just stupid?
I think that the way to properly understand Donald Trump is to understand he's just kind of an old style gangster, which is he's going to fealty is the primary, if not exclusive, pursuit of his. He's looking for people to be obedient to him, and he doesn't care under what circumstances. If he needs to make you richer to do that, he'll do that. Elon Musk. If he needs to make you poorer, red county, red state, Medi-Cal recipient, he'll do that. It doesn't matter as long what he's accumulating is not just wealth, which has defined most of his life. It is now power, because that ultimately leads to wealth. And what he's doing is using literally 18th century style mercantilistic tactics of raw power to dominate. So if you think of it beyond that, I think you're giving him too much credit. He's not thinking strategically.
If you want power, wouldn't you want to be popular? Wouldn't you want to use government to buy off people and to make everyone love you and make people rich? Why would you want prices to go up? Wouldn't you want to bring them down on day one, like he said?
I don't think he cares whether prices go up or go down as long as he's accumulating more power, and he doesn't necessarily believe that's through popular support anymore. I think what he's just demonstrated is I don't need popular support. I don't even need to win elections to get elected president again. That's the lesson. All I have to do is just be strong and be committed and keep going forward and keep dominating and dominating and dominating. I think that would be the main lesson I would have taken away if I were Donald Trump, is you can convict me. I can take classified information. I can violate every norm possible. I can stand athwart the Constitution, and I'm still going to get stronger. And he has.
Do you think it's a delusional belief that he's magical, that he can do no wrong, and that no matter what he does, even if there were a recession, he survives it because everything always works out for Donald Trump? Is that what this is?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one of the beauty of Trumpism, if that's the right word, the magic of Trumpism, is that it's predicated on one thing. It's the ideology of blaming. And no matter what happens, including losing an election, there's always somebody nefarious to blame. And he's a master at it, and his people will believe it. So, it's how you get Republicans to turn on Liz Cheney. My God, the Cheneys. I mean, how do you turn on? It's amazing.
Unfathomable. If you told me 10 years ago,
unfathomable,
that someone, a Democrat, a thrice married casino magnate Democrat, could turn the Republican Party against Liz Cheney.
Yeah. But it's
And
and it's all that's the power of the enemy, of having a common threat and enemy and rallying to your cause and turning people against their own countrymen, right? Democrats are now viewed more negatively than Russians amongst Republicans. So like that type of blame that creates this tribal identity where being a Trump supporter is more important than being an American. It's more important than being a Christian for a lot of evangelicals. And in fact, they're intertwined. So yeah, no, to think that it is more than that, I think really doesn't understand the moment, right? It's like, is this a triple bank shot? Like, you don't get to be to where you're at if you're not really, really smart. He's savvy, but he's savvy like a fox, where the fox is just trying to eat the hen. That's all it wants. It's not going to if you're overthinking beyond that, no, he just wants to eat the chicken. And that's what he's doing. Greenland, easy, pick up, go pick it up. Panama, easy, go pick it up. Low-hanging fruit. Canadians don't want to play ball. They should be a 51st state. How do we do it? We make them submit economically, and then they will genuflect, bend the knee, and they will actually beg us to become a 51st state because we have so much raw power over them. That's what this is. And because he's constitutionally prohibited from running for president again, he knows that the accumulation of power is the only thing that will continue and perpetuate that power. And that's what he's trying to accomplish. Where beforehand, re-election mattered because he was, trying to build popular support. He cared about the stock market. He cared about the economy more than anything else in the world. Now he's in his own way unshackled by all of that. It's just raw power.
All right, let me ask you a very fraught, politically incorrect question.
Yeah.
Is there some element of truth to the idea that one reason Trump is doing well or better with Latino men is the strongman, caballero, machismo element, that they like that, and that is actually helping Trump, despite the fact that he said such horrible things about a lot of immigrants?
Yeah. I write a whole chapter on this in my book. So let me ask you some questions in response. What we know is that the recently migrated, the recently naturalized Central American, Mexican, Latin American immigrant, those voters that have the highest connection and tie to their culture are the highest levels of supporters for Democrats and have been for the past 25 years. These are the voters that voted for a black man, Barack Obama, in the 75%. They voted for Hillary Clinton in the high 70s, low 60s, depending on which exit poll that you read. So they voted for women, they voted for Latinos. The rightward shift that we're seeing is overwhelmingly happening with third generation Latinos that have the weakest ethnic Latino anchor. So the question you have to ask yourself is, if it's machismo and Latino culture, why is the rightward shift only happening when these Latinos are becoming more Americanized, right? And I can go over a lot more data. Latino voters elect women at higher rates than any other race or ethnicity in the country. California is a perfect example of that. Republican and Democrat, there are more Hispanic women elected to the state legislature than men by a good number. Virtually every Latin American country has had now a woman head of state. Compare that to, Europe, Eastern and Western, and the United States, in Asia. I mean, none of this stuff exists anywhere else. So there's a whole bevy of evidence to suggest that that's not only not the case, but it's the exact opposite case. And in fact, I would argue very strenuously that machismo is just kind of a lazy ethnic trope. But there's certainly no evidence to suggest that that is a defining characteristic of voting attitudes. In fact, it is exactly the opposite.
So it seems like what's happened is, as third or fourth generation Hispanics have become more prosperous, more wealthy, they've quit voting based on ethnic identity and started voting based on their economic status as sort of working class Americans. Is that a better way of looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, shocker. The Irish, the Italians, I mean, they're a Catholic group.
This is what pisses me off.
Wow, this is amazing. This has been happening for hundreds of years in this country.
But this is what pisses me off, because 10 years ago, when I was, 15 years ago, whatever, when I was at the Daily Caller, and I was supporting, look, I had lunch with Marco Rubio's people. Yeah. We ate at PJ Clark's, and they said he's gonna do this immigration reform. And I said, number one, I admire it. and I respect it and I admire it. It's noble. Number two, you have no idea what's about to happen to you. And they said,
Right.
trust us. We're well aware. We're not. I'm like, yeah, right.
They
They
ditched it by Friday. Yeah.
they destroyed him,
Yeah.
and we're looking at the shell of a man. But I was arguing way back then at the
Yeah.
Daily Caller, don't worry about these Hispanic voters because they're going to be, as they become assimilated to American culture, they're going to start voting Republican.
Yeah.
And I was told, you don't understand these. They are not assimilating. They are not like the Irish. They are not like the Italians. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, what about we've got this great guy named George Bush and Jeb Bush, and they're saying that family values don't stop at the Rio Grande, and they're speaking Spanish, and
Yeah.
yet somehow they're not good enough. But Donald Trump is the one
Right.
that they vote for.
Right.
It's tough.
Yeah, and again, there's a big argument, and again, I go through all this in my book. Donald Trump was the beneficiary of a demographic bubble. If you look at 2016, when this rightward shift began, it was happening right as there was a massive increase in the number of U.S.-born Latino voter registrants. The vast majority under 30, by the way. So people don't look at it this way. It's very obvious, but I understand this country and its own biases, and that lunch that you had is the perfect encapsulation of this. But everybody talks about a working class shift. Everybody's talking about a youth and generational shift. That is the Hispanic shift. The younger people are disproportionately Hispanic compared to any other generation in history. The Latino male is the fastest growing segment of the blue collar, non-college educated working class. Like, everybody wants to segregate all of these other pieces except say for what the obvious common thread is, which is these are Latino voters. And they're voting very consistently with what we have seen through the course of 150 years, at least since the last major migratory waves that came through Ellis Island. And the height of hypocrisy with the Republicans is they'll say, oh, we won the Hispanic vote, but it's the Democrats that are sneaking Hispanics in to vote for them. Like, you can't have it both ways. Like, which is it? If you really believe that you're winning the Hispanic vote, which you're getting really close to, you would be sneaking these voters in because you would be winning elections. So which is it? Is it that the Democrats are illegally bringing in these voters, or that you're winning a majority of these voters? Because that argument conflicts with itself. The reality is what you were seeing with Marco, and you were good advice, is the buzzsaw that was going to be created is there is a nativist element to the Republican base, even though, and this is the great irony, it has become the most racially and ethnically diverse party that it has been under Donald Trump, and it is more racially and ethnically diverse now than it has been since the 1964 Civil Rights Act. But as I argue in my book, it's economics and demographics far, far more than it is racial polarization. In fact, we are becoming a less racially polarized voting country. And it stands to reason, as we become more pluralistic, as we become more diverse, that becomes less of an ideological or racially identifying factor. If you grow up in California, it's all black and brown and Asian. There's a handful of white kids, right? And that's why you're seeing white identity becoming more intense as it shrinks. Once you're becoming the majority, your racial and ethnic identity slips away. You're not as distinct.
Yeah.
And that lack of distinction, I think, is going to define the next American generation. It already is.
Well, my whole life, I never even thought of myself as white. I never thought of like white as being a thing. And some people say, well, that's a form of privilege. But I think, honestly, we were kind of better off when when that was kind of the way it was,
Americanness and American identity is predicated on the idea that it's an idea. It is an idea. And we are really challenged at this moment as Americans when I think the Republican Party is behaving the way it is behaving, when it's clearly got nativist sentiment, clearly, and the Democratic Party has clearly racially identifiable underpinnings for its ideology, clearly. I ascribe most of this as a transition point, an inevitable transition point of America becoming a non-white majority country, which was going to happen in the next decade. Like, it's inevitable. That's never going to be an easy transition. That's what we're going through. But for young people under 30, they will look back at these times the same way I look back as the pre-internet era, the before times, Once we get through this demographic transformation, I think we will begin to return back to the idea of this mythology of America being a place where Reagan would famously say anybody could come and be an American, right? There's obviously some question about that, especially with the case of Black Americans and what this means and what it doesn't. But the truth is, as long as we're aspirational about that and hold that and work towards that, we are becoming more quote unquote American every day. And it's one of the reasons, Matt, why I'm so optimistic about this Latinization of America, because almost all of the racial transformation is happening with Latinos, is Latinos are the moderates in both parties. They reject the politics of racial identity. They're almost exclusively focused on economic and pocketbook issues. And a lot of people on the left are like, no, they're becoming more fascist. They're becoming more right-wing. They want, the authoritarian machismo strongman. And the answer is like, no. What they want is they want to be able to pay rent on Friday. They are worried and know what the price of eggs is. You can dismiss that. You can ridicule them about that. But when you're paying 50% of your income on rent or towards your mortgage, you know what the price of everything is, including eggs. So if you want to disparage working class people, do so to your own detriment. And the right is realizing these voters, they're not going to be, you'll see this coming into the midterms. I think you're going to start to see a slippage back. And it's a long time away.
I mean, like there's a gay barber and makeup artist who was rounded up.
A Venezuelan, yeah.
Sent to El Salvador.
Yeah.
Had his head shaved. And if I were Latino, I'd be a little concerned about that, because as far as I know, this guy's only crime is,
being Venezuelan.
Gay Venezuelan makeup artist. I mean,
yeah.
I think he had a green card. I'm not sure about his legal, status, but still, come on. That's a pretty high price to pay to be sent to this El Salvador gulag. Are people concerned about that?
I think more people, and I think this is a good thing, I think more people are concerned about the loss of due process and American rights. White Americans are, more so than gay Venezuelan barbers are. Okay. Am I hearing, outrage from the Mexican community about this case? No, not at all. That doesn't mean that it's not a concern. Of course it's a concern. It's all a concern. But I guess my point is, what we're realizing is that this administration, this political movement, is going to pick you out under whatever rationale it can to punish and prosecute you. It doesn't matter whether you're Muslim. It doesn't matter whether you're Venezuelan. It doesn't matter whether you're gay. It doesn't matter whether you're a member of the press. It doesn't matter whether you're a member of the Democratic Party. If you are a threat to them, they will come after you, and they will use the awesome power of the federal government to do it. I think that's the bigger concern. There isn't like this sudden awakening going, oh my God, he's talking about all of us. I'm not seeing that in polling or anecdotally.
All right. I think we could end it there. Although, man, I could talk to you all day. Get the book. It's called The Latino Century. Mike, I know you got a Substack. Plug some stuff. What should we check out?
A lot of this conversation, if you've been interested in this, especially the changing society and institutional change and transformation, I have a Substack called The Great Transformation, where I write on this probably 3-4 times a week. Because so much is changing, the changing coalitions of the party, social institutions collapsing, the transformation of democracy, where it means what it's going to be heading to, the digital age and how it's changing us as a species. To me, we're not witnessing a political moment. We're witnessing a truly transformative moment in the history of our species as human beings, and we're learning how this civilization is going to work. And so those are the topics I tend to try to cover, with, of course, the obvious fact that it has political implications. But I really genuinely appreciate the conversation, Matt. Love your brain, love your work, proud of what you've done. It hasn't been easy, but I really appreciate you being on the show as well.
Awesome, my friend. Everybody check him out and get the book, The Latino Century. Mike Madrid, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.